Obvious question here. What's your expectations for the Fed's decision later today? How are you positioning ahead of that move?
Yeah, I think they do the 25. We've thought that all along, frankly. And part of it is, it's partly the game, right? In the sense that while you may have thought a pause made sense, and I know there's a lot of people making a good case for it, the problem with the pause, in my view, is that it sends the wrong signal. So, everything that the regulators or government does sends a signal, and the worry is if they don't do any sort of hike, that it'll say, oh, this thing must be way worse than we think on the banking side. So there is a bit of a game. And as you mentioned, the inflation problem hasn't gone away. Now, it probably, and this sounds bad, it helps. The banking crisis likely helps because there's a disinflationary impulse coming from probably a contraction in credit because banks will almost certainly pull back some in terms of their willingness to extend credit.
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly the expectation. So a lot of people feel like maybe the Fed should take a wait and see approach when it comes to this rate hike. I also want to talk about the banks. You mentioned the banks right now. Looking at with the bank performance yesterday, we saw a huge bounce back in banks yesterday. KRE finished up almost 6%. First Republic up about 30%. This morning, we're seeing the KRE down a bit. What's your expectations for the banking sector, not only when it comes to stock performance, but when it comes just to the sentiment around it?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a slog for a while, particularly in the more mid-sized banks. So the globally systematic banks have been, relatively speaking, outperforming because they already have higher capital requirements, more scrutiny in terms of stress tests, et cetera. The mid-sized banks is where I think it gets more challenging because, and Yellen said it yesterday that, it's too early to talk about regulation, but I think, higher capital requirements, more regulation is all on the table, and all that, likely in the end ends up with some sort of crimping of profit.
So Data Trek out with a note today saying that banks are cheap right now. What's your take on when it comes to investing on financials? Are there other areas of the market you're looking at right now ahead of this Fed decision?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, banks are looking cheaper. I do worry they might, particularly on these mid-sized, might get a bit cheaper. I'd probably, look elsewhere. We bought a CSX, a railroad instead. Part of that is, one is obviously the derailments hurt the rails in general. But then secondly, some of this worry about the economy continuing to, maybe or not continue, but to have more pressure here coming up has hurt the rails as well. So I think that got us in at what we think is in a much more attractive valuation. And we feel good about that kind of business, right? The rails, they aren't putting down any more track.